horde! The wind carries our destiny! Mount and ride!
High in the unforgiving spine of the Hindu Kush, where the mountains claw at the sky and the air itself feels like a blade in your lungs, something impossible is happening. The valley is narrow. Too narrow, sound doesn't escape here. It echoes, multiplies, warps. And right now, that valley is alive with chaos. The thunder of hooves slams against stone walls like rolling thunder trapped in a cage. Men scream raw, primal, terrified screams. Steel crashes against steel, horses rear, arrows slice through the air like whispers of death. And then something breaks, not a line, not a formation, an army. For the first time in 15 years, the Mongols are running, not retreating, not regrouping, running. Let that sink in. These are the same warriors who burned cities like Bukhara to the ground. The same force that crushed Samarkand like it was nothing. The same army that turned entire civilizations into dust. And now, they are fleeing in panic, because in this valley, they've met something they didn't expect. Resistance. Now I know what you're thinking. The Mongols? Running? Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Warriors, charge! For honor and victory! Charge for the clan! Break their lines! No mercy!
And by the time we're done here, you're going to understand how one man, one desperate prince with a broken army, did what entire empires failed to do. He beat them. But this story, it's not just about victory, because sometimes winning the battle is just the beginning of losing everything. To understand how insane this moment is, we need to rewind, back before the valley, back before the screams, back to when the Mongols weren't just feared, they were unstoppable. By 1221, the Mongol war machine had been tearing through Central Asia for 2 straight years, not slowing down, not stopping, just consuming. The Khwarezmian Empire, once one of the most powerful states in the Islamic world, was gone, not weakened, not damaged, gone. Bukhara, burned. Samarkand, broken. Nishapur, massacred so completely that chroniclers wrote the Mongols killed everything: men, women, children, animals, even the cats and dogs. This wasn't conquest, this was annihilation. And the Shah, the emperor himself? He didn't die in battle, he didn't die a king, he died alone, on an island in the Caspian Sea, broken, hunted, forgotten.
The storm rages, yet you stand defiant. What power do you claim? I am the Tempest's herald. Face the king's justice!
That's the world Jalal al-Din inherited, not an empire, a graveyard. And if this were a movie, he wouldn't be the chosen hero. He'd be the one nobody bets on, born to a slave mother, overlooked for succession, surrounded by brothers with better claims. But while they had titles, he had something else: skill. While others ran, Jalal stayed. While cities surrendered, he fought. While the world collapsed around him, he adapted. And somewhere in the ruins of his father's empire, he made a decision: not to flee, not to surrender, but to fight. Not because he thought he would win, but because he refused to die without trying. And that's what makes this story different. So this isn't the story of a king defending a throne. This is the story of a man with nothing left, who decided that was enough to risk everything. But here's the real question. How do you defeat an army that has never lost? An army that has perfected war into a science? An army that has spent 15 years proving that resistance is suicide?
The enemy is mobilizing. We must decide our formation. Our cavalry should flank from the left. Agreed. That will draw their archers out. Then it's settled. Signal the advance!
Because the Mongols weren't just good. They were on another level entirely. This wasn't medieval warfare as most people imagine it. This wasn't knights charging blindly into battle. This was precision, organization, speed. Every Mongol unit was structured. 10 men 100 men, 1,000 men, 10,000 men. Each soldier knew exactly where he belonged. No confusion, no chaos, just efficiency. They could communicate across the battlefield faster than most armies could think. Flags, signals, mounted couriers riding over 100 kilometers a day. And their weapons? Those composite bows weren't just powerful. They were deadly at range, capable of piercing armor, fired at full gallop, with terrifying accuracy. But the real weapon was their mind. Feign retreat, lure the enemy, break formation, destroy them. They had done it hundreds of times. It always worked.
Charge for honor and victory! Break their lines!
Because human nature always made the same mistake. And for 15 years, no one stopped them, until Parwan. And the man who stood against them, he wasn't supposed to win, he wasn't even supposed to survive. But he did something no one else dared to do. He studied them, he learned, and then he chose the battlefield. Because Jalal understood something no one else did. You don't beat the Mongols by fighting their war, you beat them by forcing them to fight yours. And in a narrow valley in the Hindu Kush, that's exactly what he did. The summer of 1221 didn't feel like summer. Not in Ghazni, not anymore, because Ghazni wasn't a city, it was a pressure cooker. Every road leading into it was filled with people, not traders, not travelers, refugees. They came in waves, from Bukhara, from Samarkand, from cities whose names were now just ashes carried by the wind. Men with hollow eyes, women clutching children who no longer cried, old men who had seen empires rise, and now watched one die. And every single one of them carried the same story. They're coming. You could hear it in whispers. You could see it in the way people flinched at distant thunder, mistaking it for hooves.
The storm is upon us! Run! It's chaos! Protect the goods! Hurry! To the buildings! Go!
You could feel it in the silence at night. A silence too heavy to be peace. Because everyone knew what the Mongols did. They didn't conquer, they erased. In the markets of Ghazni, no one haggled anymore. Food was bought quickly, weapons even quicker. And everywhere you looked, men were preparing, not for victory, for survival. And at the center of all this chaos was one man trying to build something impossible, Jalal al-Din. Let's be honest here, what he was trying to do, it shouldn't have worked. He didn't have a stable kingdom, he didn't have resources, he didn't even have loyalty he could fully trust. What he had was fragments. Fragments of an army, fragments of a broken empire, fragments of hope. And somehow, he was trying to turn those fragments into a force that could face the Mongols. Think about that. Every general before him had failed, entire empires had collapsed. And this man, with refugees, tribesmen and survivors, was planning to fight back. It sounds insane, because it was. But here's what most people miss. Jalal wasn't building just an army. He was building belief.
Warriors of the steppes, we have conquered empires. To every great God! Then let the earth tremble for victory and eternal glory. For victory!
And belief is dangerous. At the heart of Jalal's force were the remnants of the Khwarezmian military. Not many, maybe 10,000. But these weren't amateurs, these were soldiers who had seen the Mongols up close and lived. That alone made them different. And they knew the sound of Mongol arrows before they hit. They knew what a feigned retreat looked like. They knew how fast everything could fall apart. And most importantly, they knew what failure meant. These men weren't fighting for glory anymore. They were fighting because there was nothing left to lose. That kind of soldier, you don't break him easily. Then came the Turks, led by Amin Malik, Jalal's father-in-law. Now this is important, because in medieval warfare, politics was just as important as swords. Amin Malik didn't just bring soldiers, he brought legitimacy. His men were disciplined cavalry, experienced, organized. But more than that, they were tied to Jalal by blood, which should have made things stable, should have. Because as you'll see later, That same connection would become a ticking time bomb. That same connection would become a ticking time bomb.
The eastern passes are fortified. We strike from the north.
A bold plan, but supply lines are vulnerable. The risk is high, but the reward greater.
Then it is decided. We march at dawn.
And then everything changed. The news from Bamiyan spread like wildfire. A Mongol prince, Genghis Khan's own grandson, had been killed. For a brief moment, the Mongols had bled. And Genghis Khan's response. He wiped Bamiyan off the map. Not just destroyed, erased. Every living thing, gone. When that story reached the mountains of Afghanistan, something shifted. This wasn't just another invasion anymore. This was extermination. And that's when they came. From the mountains, from the valleys, from places the Mongols had never truly controlled. 30,000 Afghan warriors, not trained like professional soldiers, not equipped like elite cavalry, but they had something far more dangerous. They knew the land, and they had a reason to fight.
Brothers to arms! Forward, warriors!
These were men who had grown up in the Hindu Kush. Men who could move through mountain paths like ghosts. Men who didn't need maps, because the mountains were their home. And now, that home was under threat. You have to understand something. A professional soldier fights for orders. A tribal warrior fights for survival. And survival is a far stronger motivation. So now Jalal had an army, but calling it an army is generous. This wasn't a unified force, it was a coalition. Different cultures, different leaders, different loyalties, held together by one thing, the Mongols. That was the glue: fear, hatred, survival. But coalitions like this, they're fragile.
We cannot delay. The enemy masses at our borders. But our supplies are low. A siege would be disastrous. We must strike now before they fortify. Then we march at dawn. We stand united.
One mistake, one insult, one wrong decision, and everything falls apart. Jalal knew this. He had to know, which is why what he did next was brilliant and incredibly risky. Most commanders who faced the Mongols made the same mistake. They fought them on open ground, because that's what made sense. That's how wars were fought. But the Mongols weren't normal. Open ground, that was their playground. That's where they could move freely, encircle you, break you, destroy you. Jalal understood this. He had seen it happen, over and over again. So he asked a different question. Well, what if I don't fight their battle? What if he forced them to fight his?
This pass is key. We strike from the east, but their western flank is exposed. We can divide them.
Agreed, but our supplies are low. We must be swift. Then it is settled. We march at dawn.
That question led him to Parwan. If you look at a map, it doesn't seem special, but on the ground, it's a nightmare. A narrow valley, cliffs on both sides, barely enough space for large formations. It's the opposite of everything the Mongols wanted. No room to maneuver, no space for flanking, no freedom to retreat and regroup. Just a funnel. And if you trap an army in a funnel, you control the fight. Jalal saw it immediately. This wasn't just a battlefield. This was a weapon. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Jalal didn't just pick the terrain, he built his entire strategy around it. Infantry, placed on the heights. Why? Because height equals power. From above, arrows fall faster, hit harder, and are nearly impossible to avoid. Cavalry held in reserve, waiting, watching, not charging blindly, because this wasn't going to be a normal battle. This was going to be a trap, and traps require patience. But here's what truly made Jalal dangerous. He understood the Mongols, not just their tactics, their mindset. He knew they relied on fear, on speed, on forcing the enemy to react.
Charge back! Defend the line! Break them! No mercy!
So he did something unexpected. He didn't react, he stayed still. And that is something the Mongols weren't used to, because their entire system depended on movement. Force the enemy to chase, break formation, exploit chaos. But what happens when the enemy refuses to chase? When he stands still and waits? That's not a situation the Mongols liked, and Jalal knew it. Now let's be clear, this plan, it wasn't safe. It was a gamble, because if it failed, There was nowhere to run. The valley would become a trap for him, and every man under his command would die. No retreat, no second chance, just annihilation. And yet, he chose it anyway, because sometimes the only way to survive is to risk everything. While Jalal was setting his trap, the Mongols were already on the move. 30,000 cavalry, fast, disciplined, confident, led by Shigi Kutuk.
Charge for honor and victory! Forward! Do not falter!
And here's the irony. This wasn't one of Genghis Khan's top battlefield commanders. This was a judge, a scholar, brilliant in law, but war, not his specialty. And yet, he was given command. Why? Because Genghis didn't think this would be a real fight. To him, Jalal was just cleanup. The empire was already destroyed. This was just finishing the job. And that assumption would cost him dearly. Shigi marched toward Parwan like a man heading toward an easy victory. No hesitation, no caution, because why would there be? For 15 years, the Mongols had never lost, not once. Every army that faced them fell. Every city that resisted burned. Every empire collapsed. So why would this be any different? Why would one prince with a broken army change anything? He didn't scout properly. He didn't wait for reinforcements. He just marched straight into the valley. And in doing so, he walked right into Jalal's trap. Now picture it. The valley is silent. Jalal's forces are in position, hidden, waiting, above them on the cliffs. Archers grip their bows below. Cavalry stands ready. No one speaks because everyone knows what's coming. And then, in the distance, you hear it. Hooves, thousands of them, getting louder, closer. The Mongols are coming, confident, unstoppable, marching into a place where everything they know will fail. And Jalal, he's watching, calm, focused, because he knows something they don't. This isn't their battlefield anymore. This is his. The first rule of fighting the Mongols was simple. Don't let them choose the battlefield, because if you fought them on open ground, you weren't fighting an army, you were fighting a system, a machine, a predator that moved faster than you could think. But Parwan was not open ground. Parwan was a throat, a narrow, rocky corridor carved between jagged Hindu Kush peaks where the sunlight hit the valley floor only in thin strips, like the world itself was trying not to look directly at what was about to happen. Here, sound didn't just travel, it bounced, it multiplied. Every hoofbeat became a drum, every scream became a choir, and every mistake became fatal. Jalal al-Din understood something crucial. If the Mongols couldn't move, they couldn't win. So he built the battle around one idea: make them stand still. The morning of day one. At dawn, the air was thin and sharp. Dust hung in the light like fog. The Khwarezmian camp was quiet, not the kind of quiet that meant peace, but the kind that meant men were saving their breath for screaming later. Jalal rode the line.
Warriors of the Horde, the wind carries our destiny! Mount and ride! Forward to the mountains! Let the earth tremble! We ride, we conquer!
Not giving speeches, not shouting heroic promises, just looking at faces. Some were veterans, hard eyes, scarred hands. Some were tribesmen, wild, fierce, eager. And some were refugees holding weapons like they'd only picked them up yesterday. This wasn't an army born from tradition. It was an army born from terror. And sometimes terror is stronger than tradition. On the ridges above the valley, archers lay behind rocks. Below them, infantry waited in tight formations. Cavalry stood further back, out of sight, like a clenched fist held behind a cloak. Everything about Jalal's position screamed patience. Because the plan wasn't to charge, the plan was to let the Mongols come. Then the scouts returned, breathless, eyes wide. They're here. Not they're coming, here, already. The Mongols didn't announce themselves with banners or horns. They announced themselves the way a storm does, by changing the world. The ground began to vibrate. A distant rumble rolled through the valley. Then it grew, and grew, until it became a wall of sound. And then they appeared. A sea of riders flowing into the valley mouth, horses packed close, armor catching the light, bows slung, lances upright. It was the kind of sight that broke morale before a battle even began. Because the Mongols didn't look like men. They looked like inevitability. At their front rode Shigi Kutuk, Genghis Khan's adopted son, a man who had spent years building laws, judging disputes, shaping an empire from the inside, and now he was here to finish a war, to crush the last defiant ember of Khwarezmian resistance. He looked at the valley, he looked at the ridges, he saw Jalal's army, and he probably felt something close to annoyance, because he expected a chase, a retreat, a desperate flight. Instead, the enemy was waiting, still, silent. That was the first crack. Not in Mongol armor, in Mongol expectation, the first probes. The Mongols didn't charge right away.
Forward for the Khan! Chagatia! Onward! Victory awaits!
That's a myth people have about them, that they were mindless horsemen who just slammed into enemies. No, they were surgeons. They tested you first, they probed, they searched for the weak spot. Shigi sent forward light cavalry, fast riders, skilled archers, the kind of men who could gallop within bow range and fire without slowing. They rode in, loose formation, confident, like they were stepping into a garden. Then the valley answered, arrows dropped from above, not fired straight but rained down. Gravity added force. The shots came from angles Mongol instincts weren't built for. Men on horseback were used to enemies in front of them, not above them, not from cliffs.
Forward for victory! Charge!
A rider went down, then another. Horses screamed. A few Mongols tried to return fire, twisting in their saddles, shooting upward. But shooting up is harder. Angles are wrong, targets are smaller, and the defenders had rocks to hide behind. The Mongols pulled back, not panicked, not broken, just annoyed. But even that annoyance mattered, because the Mongols weren't used to being annoyed.
Forward, my warriors! For honor and glory! Break their lines! No mercy! For victory, man!
They were used to enemies collapsing on contact. Shigi tried again, a second probe, then a third. Each time he got the same result: prepared positions, disciplined restraint, no reckless pursuit, no open flanks. By midday, he realized something uncomfortable. This enemy wasn't going to chase him. The Mongol problem. Mongol warfare depended on two things: space to maneuver, an enemy willing to react. Parwan offered them neither. In the valley, they couldn't spread out. They couldn't ride around the flanks. They couldn't execute the classic encirclement that had crushed armies from China to Persia. And Jalal's men were doing something even more infuriating. They were staying in position, taking the hits, returning fire, holding. It was like the Mongols were trying to push water uphill. Shigi had a choice. He could pull back, he could wait, he could call for reinforcements. He could admit this wasn't simple cleanup. But overconfidence is a drug. And Shigi had been inhaling it for 15 years.
Forward, wars, chance archers! Take them no mercy!
So instead of caution, he reached for a trick. The dummy riders. Near the end of day one, Shigi ordered his men to bring forward spare horses. They took straw, cloth, old armor scraps, and they made riders, dummies. Then they mounted them. A line of extra cavalry suddenly appeared behind the Mongol ranks, making the army look larger, deeper, more overwhelming. It was psychological warfare, classic Mongol theater, the kind of deception that had made commanders panic and misjudge enemy numbers. From across the valley, Jalal watched. He didn't blink.
Forward, my brave force and dance feet! Charge!
He had been studying Mongol tactics since the world started burning. He knew about dummy riders, he knew about smoke screens, he knew about feigned retreats and false camps. So instead of panicking, he read the real message hidden inside the trick. Shigi Kutuk was trying to intimidate him, which meant Shigi wasn't confident enough to win cleanly. That was information. That was leverage. and Jalal filed it away like a knife under his sleeve. Night between days. As the sun dropped behind the peaks, the valley cooled fast. That's what mountains do. Heat leaves quickly, like hope. Both sides pulled back to their camps, but nobody slept. On the Khwarezmian side, men sharpened blades and whispered prayers. Afghan tribesmen sat in circles and told stories of Bamiyan, of the city that had been erased because it dared to kill one Mongol prince. Those stories weren't just history, they were fuel. On the Mongol side, Shigi paced. He couldn't understand why the enemy wasn't breaking, why they weren't chasing, why his usual methods weren't creating chaos.
Warriors, the enemy is near. Sharpen your blades and ready your hearts. We march at dawn. Let the flames guide us to glory.
But the Mongols didn't fear difficult fights. They feared losing the initiative. And in Parwan, they didn't have it. Day 2, the chessboard tightens. At dawn, Shigi changed tactics. Instead of light probes, he pushed more men forward, not the whole army, but enough to apply pressure, enough to force a response. He expected Jalal to blink, to send cavalry out, to attempt a counterattack, to make the mistake every other commander made, trying to beat the Mongols at their own game. But Jalal still refused, still waited, still held. So Shigi tried to create a weakness. He sent riders to harass the edges, looking for paths up the cliffs, looking for cracks in the ridge lines, looking for any way to pull Jalal's forces down into open ground. But those cliffs weren't just terrain, they were home.
Brothers, the time has come. The enemy awaits beyond these peaks. We are ready, my lord. Forward, march!
The Afghan warriors knew every path, every loose stone, every narrow track. And when Mongol scouts tried to climb, they didn't always come back down. The valley was doing what Jalal wanted it to do, eating Mongol advantages, slowly, patiently. The psychological war. By midday of day 2, something subtle began to happen. The Mongols started to feel watched. Not because enemies were everywhere, but because enemies weren't moving. It's hard to explain, but imagine being a predator. The predator expects fear, movement, running. You run, you strike, you feed, and suddenly the prey stops running. It stares back. It stands its ground. Some Mongol riders began to mutter, not fear, but confusion. And confusion is deadly in a system built on certainty. Shigi knew he couldn't sit here forever. Horses needed water, men needed space, and a valley like this was a cage. Late in day 2, Shigi sent a unit forward as if they were about to break through. They charged, fast, hard, trying to provoke Jalal's cavalry. The Mongols got close enough that Jalal's men could see their faces, and still, Jalal didn't move. His men fired from position. By sunset, Shigi was furious, cold rage, the kind of rage that pushes men into bad decisions, because he had come here expecting an easy win. Both camps knew something. Day 3 was coming, and day 3 would decide everything. The Mongols could not afford to leave Parwan without victory. Jalalis couldn't afford to wait much longer either. Tribesmen fought fiercely, but their loyalty was fragile. If the battle dragged on too long, the glue holding his army together could crack. Shigi Kutuk didn't sleep that night. 2 days of frustration had led him to a conclusion he didn't like. This enemy wasn't going to make a mistake. He would have to force one. At dawn, the Mongol army formed up, tight, focused, disciplined, deadly, relentless. Across the field, Jalal watched. He could feel it. The energy had changed. The Mongol right flank moved first, a wave of cavalry surging forward toward the Afghan division. Shigi had identified them as the weakest link, not trained soldiers, tribesmen. The ground shook as the Mongols charged, hooves pounding, dust rising. For a moment, everything hung on one question. Would the Afghans hold? Saif al-Din didn't run, and neither did his men. They stood exactly as Jalal had ordered, not mounted, not charging, standing, and they fired. The first Mongol riders hit the range, then the second line, then the third. Horses screamed, men fell, momentum faltered, but the Mongols didn't stop. They turned, suddenly, cleanly, and began to run. The classic Mongol feigned retreat. You chase, you break formation, you die. 500 Afghan warriors broke, just 500, but that was enough. They saw the Mongols running, instinct, pride, thrill. They charged until they weren't. Because the moment those Afghans were isolated, the Mongols turned, like wolves, arrows first, then blades. They were surrounded. Not one survived. It was brutal, fast, efficient, and for a moment, it looked like the Mongols had control. But Jalal al-Din had been waiting, watching, not the charge, not the retreat.
Warriors, the enemy gathers below, but we stand united, our hearts forged in fire. Let the winds carry our battle cry. Onward to victory. Charge!
The timing, because that moment, right after the Mongols executed their perfect trap, was also their weakest point. Their formation was stretched, their focus forward, their confidence high. They thought they were winning. And that's when Jalal moved. He didn't send the whole army. That would have been a mistake. He sent his best, his elite cavalry, the men who had fought beside him through everything, and he led them himself, straight into the Mongol center. No hesitation. The impact was devastating. Jalal hit them like a hammer because the Mongols weren't ready. Not for this, not here, not now. In open terrain, the Mongols would have adapted instantly, but this wasn't open terrain. This was Parwan, a narrow valley, packed, compressed. And suddenly, the Mongols were the ones trapped. As Jalal's cavalry slammed into the center, the heights came alive. Arrows rained down. The Mongols were being hit from every direction, front, sides, above. Horses panicked. Men shouted orders that couldn't be followed. There was nowhere to go. For the first time in 15 years, the Mongols hesitated. Not strategically, not tactically, emotionally. They had never been here before, never been trapped, never been unable to execute their doctrine. Jalal saw it, that flicker, that hesitation, and he knew this was it. He gave the order, full advance, everything. Infantry surged forward, Turks charged, Afghans roared. The Mongol line collapsed. Not a retreat, a collapse. What followed wasn't a battle. It was destruction. The valley wouldn't let them regroup. Men fell, horses crashed, formations disintegrated. Some tried to flee, but the valley had no escape. And behind them, Jalal's forces were relentless. This wasn't just war. This was revenge for Bukhara, for Samarkand, for Nishapur. No mercy, no prisoners, just vengeance. By the time it ended, half the Mongol army was gone. 15,000 dead. For the Mongols, that wasn't defeat. That was catastrophe. The survivors ran, not in formation, not in order. Running through the valley, Shigi Kutuk barely escaped, and with him, the myth of Mongol invincibility shattered. Jalal stood in the valley, breathing hard, covered in dust and blood. Around him, his army roared. They had done it. They had beaten the Mongols. Not survived, not resisted, defeated them for the first time in 15 years. Jalal wasn't just a prince anymore. He was a symbol, proof that the unstoppable could be stopped.
Warriors, ride with me to victory! Charge! Let the earth tremble!
Victory has a sound. It's loud, wild, uncontrolled. In the valley of Parwan, that sound echoed long after the fighting stopped. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, the battlefield turned into a camp. Stories were already being told, exaggerated, glorified, immortalized. Victory brings something else: spoils, weapons, armor, gold, horses, especially horses. Among the captured animals, there was one. A white horse, strong, beautiful, perfect. Amin Malik and Saif al-Din Igrak both wanted the horse. After defeating the Mongol, after changing history, they were arguing over a horse. But this wasn't really about the horse. It was about respect, about status, about who mattered more. The argument grew, voices rose, men gathered. It stopped being private, it became public, and that made it dangerous.
We strike at dawn, no delays! Patience, the defensor. Hesitation is death! Fool, you'll doom us all!
This wasn't just a disagreement, it was a test of authority. Jalal stepped in. He had to, because if he didn't, the argument could spiral. But leadership isn't just about stepping in, it's about how you do it. And in that moment, Jalal made the worst decision of his life. He sided with Amin Malik. Amin Malik didn't stop at winning. He struck Igrak with a whip in front of everyone, a commander, a leader, A man who had just held his ground against a Mongol charge was whipped. That wasn't just an insult, that was humiliation, the kind that doesn't fade. Everything changed in that moment. Not on the battlefield, in the camp. Their leader had been dishonored. And worse, the man they had just followed to victory and had allowed it. That kind of wound doesn't heal. It spreads through whispers, through looks, through silence. Because pride is everything in a warrior culture, and once it's broken, so is loyalty. That night, something quiet happened. No shouting, no fighting, just movement. From a distance, everything looked normal. But behind those fires, men were packing weapons, supplies, horses, and one by one, they left. No speeches, no goodbyes, just footsteps in the dark, 30,000 warriors, gone. At dawn, the valley was silent again. Jalal woke to victory, but he stepped outside, into something else. Absence, the Afghan lines, empty, the fires, cold. The space where half his army had been, gone. Just like that. Jalal had achieved the impossible. He had defeated the Mongols, given hope to an entire region, proven that resistance was possible. And in one moment, one decision, one failure of leadership, he lost half his army, not in battle. Battles are fought with weapons, but wars are won with people, and people are fragile. You can defeat the strongest enemy in the world, but if you can't hold your own side together, you lose anyway. And Jalal knew it. He had to, because far away, marching toward him, was not another general, not another force, but the man himself, Genghis Khan. And this time, there would be no mistakes, no underestimation, no mercy. And Jalal? Now he had only half the army he needed because of a horse. Far from Parwan, beyond the mountains, beyond the valleys filled with smoke and memory, a storm was forming, not a natural one. This storm had a name, Genghis Khan. The messenger didn't ride slowly. He couldn't. Across scorched plains and broken cities, he pushed his horse beyond its limits, changing mounts, riding through night, ignoring exhaustion, because the message he carried was unthinkable. When he finally reached the Mongol camp, he didn't shout. He didn't announce it. He delivered it quietly, because even saying it out loud felt dangerous. A Mongol army had been defeated. At first, there was silence, then disbelief, because for 15 years, this had never happened, not once. The Mongols didn't lose. They crushed, they destroyed, they erased. But this was different. And when the message reached Genghis Khan, the world held its breath. The chronicles say he was furious, but that word doesn't capture it. This wasn't anger, this was something colder, controlled, focused, because Genghis Khan wasn't just a conqueror, he was a system, and systems don't panic, they adapt. He didn't scream, he didn't execute the messenger, he asked one question: where? Because to him, location was everything. And then when he heard the answer, Parwan, a narrow valley, he understood immediately. This wasn't just a defeat, it was a lesson. Genghis Khan went to the battlefield himself. Think about that. The most powerful man in the world, walking through a valley filled with dead Mongols. 15,000 of his warriors, men who had never lost, now lying in silence. And instead of rage, he studied. He walked the ground. Shigi Kutuk was brought before him, the man who had commanded the army, the man who had failed. In most empires, this would end one way, execution. But Genghis didn't do that. He looked at him, then at the valley, and said, "You did not understand the battlefield. Not, you are weak, not you are useless, but nor you chose the wrong place to fight." Because to Genghis Khan, war wasn't about pride, it was about reality. And the reality was simple. Jalal had forced the Mongols into a position where they couldn't be Mongols, and that was unacceptable. Genghis didn't delegate this. He didn't send another general. He took command, personally, because now this wasn't cleanup anymore. This was correction, and corrections had to be absolute. He gathered his forces, not 30,000, not a small detachment, the full weight of the Mongol war machine, tens of thousands of cavalry, disciplined, rested, angry, and he pointed them in one direction, toward Jalal al-Din, Back in Parwan, Jalal didn't celebrate anymore. He couldn't, because he knew what was coming. You don't defeat the Mongols and get ignored. You get hunted. And now, the greatest hunter in history was coming for him. So he made a decision. He wouldn't stay. He couldn't. Not with half an army, not with a broken coalition, not against Genghis Khan himself. So he gathered what remained, 30,000 men, and behind them, something even heavier. Refugees, families, children, people who believed. He didn't turn them away because he wasn't just a commander anymore. He was hope, and that hope became a burden.
Warriors of the realm, the hour of our destiny is at hand. Yes, lead us. We march to victory for honor and the empire.
Because an army can move fast, but a migration? It crawls, carts, animals, children who can't keep up. Every mile took time. Every delay brought the Mongols closer. Because the Mongols, they didn't slow down, they didn't carry refugees, they moved like a blade through the land. Fast, precise, relentless, and the distance between them shrunk. This wasn't a campaign anymore, this was a hunt, and Jalal was the prey, but not weak prey, dangerous prey. The kind you don't underestimate twice. Genghis Khan knew that now. He wouldn't walk into another trap. He wouldn't fight on Jalal's terms. This time, he would choose the battlefield. And that changed everything, because at Parwan, Jalal controlled the terrain. Now, he was running, reacting, trying to survive. And that's where the Mongols were strongest. The math was simple. Mongol army speed 100 kilometers per day. Jalal's column maybe half that. You don't need a strategist to see the outcome. They were going to catch him. The only question was where. And when they did, there would be no valley, no cliffs, no trap, just open ground. Exactly what the Mongols wanted. Jalal knew he couldn't outrun them forever, so he aimed for something else. The Indus River, beyond it, India, a chance, possibility, not victory, but survival. And sometimes, that's enough.
Forward, my warriors! Let the river guide us to victory! The mountains will witness our strength!
Day by day, the tension grew. Dust clouds appeared on the horizon. Scouts reported movement. Closer, closer. The Mongols were coming, and this time, they weren't walking into a trap. They were bringing the storm. By November 1221, Jalal reached the Indus. The river was right there, wide, deep, fast. Freedom was within reach, but behind him, the earth shook again. The sound of hooves, not distant anymore, right there, because Genghis Khan had caught him. And this time, there would be no escape. The river was right there, wide, deep, violent. The Indus roared like it knew what was coming. Jalal al-Din stood on its banks, looking across to the other side. Freedom, survival, a second chance. Behind him, thunder. The Mongols had arrived, not scouts, not a small force, the full army, and at its center, Genghis Khan himself.
Forward, warriors! To victory!
There would be no Parwan today, no narrow valley, no trap, just open ground and nowhere left to run. The Mongols spread out like a crescent, wings stretching wide, center pushing forward, a perfect formation designed to trap, to crush, to end. Jalal turned to his men, what was left of them, 30,000 soldiers, exhausted, outnumbered, and behind them, thousands of civilians, families, children. There was no retreat. So they stood. The battle began at dawn. Mongol arrows filled the sky like a storm of iron. Jalal's left flank held at first, fighting hard, pushing back. For a moment, looked like Parwan might happen again. But Genghis Khan had learned. He didn't attack blindly. He sent a force around the heights, climbing, flanking, and when they struck from above, everything broke. The line shattered, men fell, commanders died. The army began to collapse. This wasn't a defeat. It was the end. Surrounded, outmaneuvered, outmatched. Jalal watched it happen, and in that moment, he understood there was no winning this. Only one thing left: escape. He turned his horse toward the river. The Indus surged below, fast, deep, unforgiving. Arrows flew around him, men shouted, but he didn't stop. He rode straight to the edge and jumped, horse and rider, off the cliff, into the raging river. For a second, he disappeared. Then he surfaced, fighting the current, dragging himself across, and somehow, impossibly, he made it. On the other side, Jalal stood, alive, across the river. Genghis Khan watched. He didn't order archers to fire, didn't send riders after him. He just watched.
The currents are strong, but we must press on. I am with you, brother. Let us ride! The pass is near. We will make it by nightfall. Aye, together we are unstoppable.
And then he said, a father should be proud of such a son, not an enemy, not prey, a warrior. Why, Jalal had lost everything, his army, his empire, his war. But he had done something no one else had. He had defeated the Mongols and lived to tell the story. And sometimes that's enough to become legend, because if it did, Jalal al-Din's name would be everywhere. He was the man who did the impossible, the man who stood in a narrow valley and broke the Mongols. For one moment in time, he proved something the world had forgotten. The Mongols were not invincible, but history isn't written by moments. It's written by outcomes. And in the end, Jalal lost. Not because he was weaker, not because he lacked courage, but because he couldn't hold everything together. Because war isn't just about defeating your enemy, it's about holding your people, and that is where everything fell apart. Parwan wasn't just a battle, it was a warning that even the strongest force in the world has a weakness, but it was also a reminder. And that victory means nothing if you lose unity. Jalal had the strategy. He had the courage. He had the moment. But he didn't have control over what came after. And sometimes, that's what decides everything. Jalal al-Din didn't disappear after the Indus. He fought on for years, across Persia, across Anatolia, a king without a kingdom, a warrior without a home. Until one day, he was gone. Killed not in a grand battle, but in obscurity. And yet, his story survived, because legends don't need empires, they need moments. And Parwan was one of those moments. So what do we take from this? Maybe it's simple. No empire is unstoppable, no army is unbeatable, and no matter how powerful something seems, there is always a point where it can break. But breaking your enemy is only half the battle. The other half is not breaking yourself. Because in the end, Jalal didn't lose to the Mongols. He lost to something far more human: pride, division, a single mistake. And that's what makes this story timeless. Because even today, the lesson remains the same. Giants can fall, but only if you stand together.